I know Prime Video makes it real hard to find good movies, but I just found 18 incredibly underrated movies you can catch on Prime Video right now. That's right, we're going to talk about 18 underrated movies. All of them are action-packed, even though they're not all action movies. As usual, the full list of movies discussed can be found in the top pinned comment down below, not the video description. But let's go ahead and get started with my number 18 pick, which is at the back of the pack, but in this movie, a group of bank robbers stash all of their stolen cash with a family on a camping trip. They then later go hunt down that family. And it becomes a pretty wild road movie with a fair amount of action for a low-budget thriller like this. And for a low-budget thriller, you've got a decent cast here too. The story here doesn't go much deeper than what I described, but it does have some fantastic moments. If you're fans of movies like these and you missed this one, definitely check it out, but do keep in mind it's at the back of a pack of 18. If you did not like the Jake Gyllenhaal remake of the movie The Guilty, about a 911 operator that was on Netflix, a movie I did recommend, but if you wanted more action, my next pick is going to be right up your alley, and it stars Halle Berry in The Call. Now, in this movie, she also plays a 911 operator that gets a very disturbing call, but things just continue to escalate in this one, and she gets out from behind her desk, and this ends up being a really harrowing story. Now, it does go into some predictable directions, which is why I have it ranked so low, but this was directed by Brad Anderson, who's done really great movies like The Machinist, Session 9, and even though The Call is kind of a by-the-book thriller really targeted at mass audiences, he directed the hell out of it, and it ends up having some insanely intense moments in it, especially again for a kind of by-the-book thriller like this. If that's not for you though, my next pick is far from being by the book. It's titled The Frame, and it's from the same creators as a movie titled Ink that I've recommended here on the channel.
The devil was no puppet, and the writer would not write him. And if the writer would trap him in this house, the devil would tear the house down.
Now this is a low-budget science fiction fantasy movie, and in years of experience watching low-budget sci-fi fantasy movies, The Frame is an amazing looking one. There is stunning cinematography in this movie, especially for something done on such a low budget. I mean, it really is rare for a movie like this to look this good and to look this good in almost every single scene. This movie will lose some of you. It's really kind of for the art film crowd, especially some of you really enjoy indie flicks. This is a real gem that's got some wild stuff going on in it. But don't expect a Christopher Nolan level production with this. Again, this is fairly low budget for a story of this kind. It's an insanely low budget. Now, Indian director Tarsim Singh has directed some visually stunning movies like The Cell and The Fall. He also did a sci-fi movie that's a little more straightforward titled Selfless. Now this too has some beautiful cinematography, but it's done in gray tones and it's a much more drab movie than his other works that are very, very colorful. But in this movie, Ben Kingsley plays this billionaire who's at the end of his life, and he's able to have his mind put inside the body of a much younger man played by Ryan Reynolds. And even though the movie may look complex, it's a fairly basic setup and it delivers. It's actually a pretty solid flick. Now, if you're used to seeing Ryan Reynolds do these bigger budget action movies and you're expecting a little bit more from this, you could be disappointed. But if you're just looking for kind of a thinky sci-fi thriller, then Selfless has got some fantastic twists and turns, and it does make you think a bit. It's got some interesting elements that I thought kind of helped it rise above the level that it was at, and I was honestly surprised to find out that Singh directed this because it's so far off from his other films, but still, I liked it just about as much as his other films. Now, I've got a little bit of horror here for you, but I did try to make sure all of these movies had a fair amount of action in them, and another low-budget horror movie that has got a surprising amount of action in it, especially when you consider it only takes place at one little gas station in the middle of nowhere, is Splinter. Now, in this movie, a group of people become trapped inside this gas station when they realize there's some sort of creature outside that is incredibly deadly. But instead of this big monster roaming around, it seems to be some sort of bacteria or almost like fungus that has these spikes that can infect you. And you get so many horror elements with this. You get your classic jump scares, body horror, and there's even some body snatcher elements in this as well. And again, for something that's in one location and done on a fairly low budget, this movie really delivers a pretty fantastic experience. But if you're not into horror movies, Splinter is not going to be the one for you. I do not recommend it for you. Now, my next pick is titled The Tunnel. It comes from Norway, and there is an original Norwegian version and an English dubbed version. But unlike Netflix and other streaming services, Prime Video makes you choose the separate movie before you start. It's not a setting you can change once you start the movie, so keep that in mind, but they do have both versions. Anyway, this is loosely based on real events, or rather, they condensed a bunch of tunnel fires that happened in Norway into one movie, or at least one fictional story, yet a lot of the elements in this are derived from various disasters that have happened in Norway. It's a very mountainous region, they have incredibly long tunnels there, and in this movie, a tanker truck crashes, causes an explosion, and traps a bunch of people inside the tunnel. Sounds a little bit like Daylight with Sylvester Stallone, and it is, except it feels much more realistic. It's not an over-the-top action movie in any kind of way. It really is just a straightforward disaster movie. I may have liked this better if it were based on an actual event instead of this amalgamation. It takes quite a while to get going, but it's still an interesting disaster flick from Norway that's really well produced, if not a little bit slow in the first half. Maybe second to The Social Network, the best movie that Justin Timberlake ever starred in is actually a pretty cool sci-fi flick with an interesting concept titled In Time.
For a few to be immortal, many must die. No one should be immortal if even one person has to die.
This movie takes place in a future where everybody knows exactly how long they have to live. There's even a convenient timer built right into your arm, and that time is actually used as currency. Poor people have less time, rich people have unlimited time. And there's kind of a cyberpunk theme. Cillian Murphy actually plays the villain in this and does a fantastic job. If you passed on this one because you're just not a fan of Justin Timberlake, then you missed out, because it actually is a pretty cool little sci-fi flick. Not necessarily mind-blowing, but it's better than you might have expected. My next pick is one of the first big action movies that The Rock ever starred in. So this was before he was a big movie star, and really even before he was bald. I'm talking about The Rundown.
Option A doesn't work for me, Mr. Beck.
Now, this is another kind of run-of-the-mill PG-13 movie. However, it punches above its weight. Not only is The Rock really good in this, Seann William Scott is pretty good. They've actually got unusually good chemistry in this movie, but Christopher Walken plays the bad guy, and he has a lot of fun with his role in this movie. It's really fun to kind of watch him chew up the scenery in The Rundown. And the aesthetic is great in this movie. The locations that they're in are all kind of beautiful, and it's kind of a bright, colorful action movie. It's fairly safe for the family as well. I mean, it is PG-13. There's a lot of hitting and your occasional potty word, but pretty fun action, especially for a movie done at this level. I'm honestly surprised how well this movie holds up. Now, my next pick comes from the late 90s and is a really twisted thriller that actually stars Danny Glover, Dennis Quaid, and the forever young Jared Leto. That's right, he looked the exact same in 1997 as he does now. But in this movie, Dennis Quaid plays an FBI agent who's actually hunting down a serial killer potentially responsible for kidnapping his son. Danny Glover is actually really amazing in this movie. I mean, I'm not surprised, I'm a fan of his, I like him in things, but he's doing a very different role from anything you've probably seen him do, and he kills it. Not only does this movie have some twists and turns, but there's an entire sequence on a train that's actually really action-packed. Again, a lot of action for a movie like this, for a thriller from the 90s. For whatever reason, this one has just been forgotten with time, but it's still an excellent flick if you've never seen it. Another movie that I know a lot of people missed is The Matador, starring Pierce Brosnan and Greg Kinnear.
You're a hitman?
Oh, please, please. My handler calls me a facilitator. Facilitator of fatalities.
Now, this is not long after Pierce Brosnan completed his time as James Bond, and in this movie he plays a hitman. But what's so funny is he's not playing kind of a slick hitman. Well, I guess he is slick at times, but he's kind of dirty and silly and kind of an odd character, and he becomes friends with a very regular guy played by Greg Kinnear. This is a true comedy, but it does have some tense moments, and it's not a real knee slapper, even though it's plenty clever and the storytelling is quite good here. But if you're a fan of either of those guys, this movie really is a must-watch. They're fantastic together, and it's cool to see Pierce Brosnan doing kind of a hitman thing that's very different from Bond, so close to his Bond career. Even though it's not towards the top, this is one of my stronger recommendations on the list.
It's compact, it's safe, it's comfortable, everything you want in a new liver. The price, $756,000.
Now, even though my next pick is in the middle of the pack, it happens to be one I've really liked over the years. I just recognize it's far from a masterpiece. But Repo Men, starring Jude Law and Forrest Whitaker, is kind of a wild, nasty sci-fi movie with some weird moments in it that are not going to be for everybody. But this movie takes place in, again, a cyberpunk dystopian future where people everywhere are fitted with artificial organs. However, these artificial organs are insanely expensive, and when you can't pay your bills, the Repo Men come to take the organs back. This movie is gory, and not just gory, weird gory as you get towards the end, but it's got some cool moments in it that are well written, well crafted, an unusually cool soundtrack, and a vibe that kind of stands out from other things on this list. If you generally like a lot of my recommendations, check this one out, especially if you're not squeamish, because this one can be gross at times. If you've been watching the new Arnold documentary on Netflix and you want to watch a deep-cut Arnold movie, it's not that deep, but it is one of his more underrated flicks, Raw Deal. Now, Schwarzenegger doesn't have many movies I would consider to be underrated. They're all fairly well appreciated, but Raw Deal is a really cool flick from the 80s where he plays this undercover cop. There's gangsters, there's great one-liners, there's just fantastic 80s action, and a really great 80s aesthetic through the whole movie. And even when there's not really a lot of action in the story, the movie crams action in. Like the first time we see Schwarzenegger, he's racing somebody for really no good reason. I mean, and it's early Schwarzenegger, it's after The Terminator, but you'll recall he doesn't speak much in that movie, and it's before Predator, and he gets a lot of dialogue in this movie, and he's really funny. This is a movie that I think showcased how funny he would potentially be in future projects. So if you're a fan of his and somehow this movie has eluded you over the years because it's just not one of his bigger movies, definitely check it out. It's a real Arnold gem. Now, if you'd rather see an old action star beating people up, I recommend checking out Mel Gibson in Get the Gringo. Now, I know a lot of people missed this one because this was released not too long after all of his shenanigans, I guess we'll call them, but it is one of the cooler flicks he's made later in his career. This movie also starts out with bank robbers trying to escape. Mel Gibson is one of those bank robbers, and he gets thrown into a wild Mexican prison. I actually looked up this prison afterwards, and while it is fictional, it does depict the way a lot of prisons were in Mexico at the time that they made this movie. Apparently, conditions are better now, but these prisons used to be so overcrowded, they kind of became like little cities, and women and children lived inside the prison with the men because there was nowhere else for them to live. Wild stuff. So the movie actually depicts that fairly well, but then you get this complicated plot of him trying to escape. I'll even say overly complicated. It's really fun and entertaining. If you do not mind watching a Mel Gibson movie, this one is really top-notch. Now, another top-notch flick that just didn't get nearly enough praise when it was released stars Brad Pitt and is actually a dynamite World War II thriller titled Allied. Now, this is a fantastic World War II era spy thriller. It's actually directed by Robert Zemeckis, Obviously stars Brad Pitt, who is amazing in it, but you also get Marion Cotillard, who plays his wife. They're actually spies together, or that's how they meet. And after the opening sequences of the movie, he learns that his wife, the woman he loves, the mother of his children, might actually be a German spy. The second half of the movie is really him trying to figure out if it's true before he acts on it. And with that setup, you get some amazingly tense moments, but you also get some fantastic action for a World War II spy movie. I mean, the opening sequence is dynamite, and there's some other moments that are really great. The movie feels a little bit old-fashioned, but it looks brand spanking new. There's stunning cinematography in this thing. It's a dynamite Brad Pitt flick that just, I don't know, was probably hard to market. I'm even having a hard time explaining why you should watch it, but it's just really well done. If you've got any sort of love for any of the details I described, just World War II, spy movies, Brad Pitt, Marion Cotillard, this, again, is a top-notch production. I say that to say that my next pick is an insanely low-looking production. In fact, they went out of their way to make this movie look low budget. They probably spent quite a bit of money, in fact, making Black Dynamite look as low budget as it does.
Black Dynamite. He's super cool and he know kung fu. Drives a $5,000 car and wears a $100 suit.
You're so righteous.
This is also true.
Now, personally, I think this is one of the funniest movies ever made. It stars Michael Jai White as Black Dynamite, and if you don't know, Michael Jai White is actually a real fighter, and he's doing some pretty fast kicks and punches in this movie, but this is just pure silliness. It's structured after old blaxploitation films, but even though it kind of feels like one, it is just a silly comedy from top to bottom, and the way it's written, every single scene is packed with so many funny lines, and there's so many great comedy actors in this as well. It's kind of overflowing with really good comedy actors. This is one I watch anytime I need a good chuckle, and I'm honestly surprised they didn't make more of them. I know Michael Jai White apparently has a Western that is yet to be released, but Black Dynamite holds up really well for me. Now, it's not for everybody. It's got a lot of humor in it that would be considered uncouth or outdated today, but that's another reason I kind of love it. Next up on the list is a Western, but even though most of the movies on this list are packed with action, this Western is not. In fact, it can be kind of slow-paced for the first 2/3. Now, it's not too slow-paced, it's well-written, well-acted, but in Open Range, it takes quite a while building up to the final shootout, but man, once that final shootout kicks off, not only is it really well shot, well directed by Costner, but I actually like this movie better than Dances with Wolves, which he actually won an Academy Award for. To me, this feels more like the old style Westerns from the 60s. I absolutely love this movie. I love all the characters. Robert Duvall is amazing in this movie. I think this might be one of my favorite characters of his, and again, that final shootout is just dynamite stuff, and it's the reason this movie is ranked so high on a list full of action-packed movies. From 1983, a long-time personal favorite of mine is Uncommon Valor.
And if we meet again, well, then we'll smile. And if not, well, then this parting was well made.
In this movie, Gene Hackman leads a group of vets back to Vietnam to try to save people from a POW camp. A young Patrick Swayze is in this, Fred Ward, really fantastic characters that are really well fleshed out, and similar to Open Range, most of the action in Uncommon Valor happens at the end, where they actually have a siege on this POW camp, but everything else leading up to it is all of the planning and the training, and it ends up kind of being structured like a heist movie, where you've got all the planning and then the execution. It's not really a war movie, not really a Vietnam flick. This is really post-Vietnam stuff, and a lot of the themes are post-Vietnam as well. If you never watched this, Jim, and you love Darren Van Dam recommendations, check it out. You will understand why I recommended it so strong and how it earned the #2 spot. But my #1 pick on this list of movies packed with action on Prime Video is Attack the Block. In this movie, aliens crash land in what I guess is the equivalent of housing projects in the UK, and it's packed with fantastic characters. If you can't tell, it has a lot in common with movies like Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead. And not only are all the characters and the writing great, but the way they depict the aliens is actually done with practical effects and puppets, and it looks amazing. It's not what you would expect to see in a movie like this, and I love it for that. And it's not just a gimmick. I mean, the practical effects look fantastic in several scenes in the movie, and it ends up making this so much better than it would have been if they just crammed a bunch of CGI aliens in there. In my opinion, this is a highly rewatchable action comedy. It's got some killer visuals that were just really well shot, but also some really funny moments, and there's no doubt that this movie led to John Boyega being cast in Star Wars because the action is that good in the movie, and it looks like there is now an Attack the Block 2 in pre-production. So maybe in about 2 years or so, we could see a sequel to this thing. But that is the list. Again, the full list is in the top pinned comment. If you like getting movie recommendations, consider clicking that subscribe button. But I will keep making these episodes as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special Prime Video episode, and you will see me on the next one.